First thing, we'll be having our opening address. Thereafter, we'll have the main presentation that will talk more about the economic impact of the global energy transition on the African economy. And that would be handled by none other than Mr. Joseph Fiadzo. And I will be taking his profile shortly. Thereafter, we'll go on to having our question and answer sessions. So when these presentations are going on, I would advise, if it's possible, get a piece of paper, get a pen, get a book. Just make sure you take 1 or 2 notes down, because you definitely get some important things you'll want to go back to after today. And then if you have questions, so you also be able to note them down in the process. All right. Because just after the session, we'll be having, just after the presentation, we'll be having a Q&A session. Okay. So with that, we'll be able to get our questions out, and Mr. Joseph will be able to give us answers to that. And thereafter, we'll be having a panel discussion. We'll have the panel discussion just after the Q&A session, and that would be moderated by none other than the convener of this program, which is Mr. Joshua. And then just after that, also, we'll still have a time for us to discuss on what has been discussed by the panelists, to give our contributions, to ask our questions. And after that, we'll have an open discussion. We'll have our closing remarks, and then see how we can wrap up for the day. So that's just a summary of how the events would go today. So first thing first, we'll move straight to the opening address. And that would be taken by none other than Mr. Benedict Amoako. He's a HSC professional with GPI External Affairs. Mr. Benedict, if you're available, please, would like to have the welcome address. So you can unmute and go ahead, sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Host. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Benedict Amoako, as she rightly said, and I deem it a great honor to be given this opportunity to welcome you all to this morning's event. So on behalf of the Global Petroleum Institute, I would like to officially welcome you to the inaugural Energy Development Conference. We are gathered here today to tackle one of the most critical shifts of our generation under the theme, the economic impact of energy transition. For decades, energy discussions focus primarily on supply and demand. Today, the conversation has changed. We are no longer just talking about how we power our homes and industries. We are talking about a fundamental restructuring of global economies. While the transition to cleaner energy is an environmental necessity, it is also a massive economic engine. It presents us with unique opportunities and significant challenges in job creation, infrastructure investments, and the pursuit of energy sovereignty. Resource discoveries hold immense potential to transform economies at both the micro and macro levels, with citizens rightfully positioned as the primary beneficiaries. Governments have a fiduciary duty to manage these resources through strategic policies and developmental projects. However, Africa consistently struggles with capacity building and resource management. A paradoxical situation persists where we import refined oil despite owning refineries, export raw materials while importing finished products, and settle for minor shares in resource agreements due to a lack of technological and financial capacity. The future of the energy sector is one that is very critical. The world's demand is shifting from fossil fuels, and Africa must also prepare for it. It is a decision that must be carefully and holistically studied, so it does not do more harm to us than the good it promises. We should be able to answer some questions and lay down very important systems that will create an enabling environment for the initiation, the sustenance and development of our energy sector. The expertise in this virtual room represents some of the finest in the sector. I urge you all to participate actively in the Q&A sessions and networking breaks. The silence eloquence of your discussions today will help shape the strategies our industry needs to remain sustainable and impactful in a fast-changing global landscape. Thank you for joining us. Redefine the economic future of energy. Let the conversation begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benedict. Like he said, let the conversation begin. And one major part, he said, participate in the Q&A, because you don't know what you would say today that would impact the policies. Because definitely energy transition, it affects all of us. It is not just the government or it's for that person, it's for that other person. It affects all of us. So it is good for us to be part of that discussion and see how we can make it suit us as we go. So thank you so much for that opening welcome address, Mr. Benedict. We're really, really grateful. So we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the presentation, the main presentation on the economic impact of the global energy transition on Africa economy. It will be taken by none other than Mr. Joseph Fiadzo, and I'll quickly give us a brief profile of Mr. Joseph. Definitely you could go back to the brochure to get more, but I'll just give us some briefs that we need to know about the person of Mr. Joseph. And who actually is Mr. Joseph Fiadzo? He is the Assistant Commissioner, Ghana Revenue Authority, GRA, and also the Acting Head of Extractive Sector Taxation of Ghana Revenue Authority. He has over 26 years experience in this field, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts from University of Ghana and a Master of Business Administration in Finance from the University of Ghana Business School. And having completed all mandatory examinations, he is awaiting his Bachelor of Law certifications from the Mount Crest University, Accra. Another good thing we need to know about him is that he's a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ghana, and a tax practitioner of the Chartered Institute of Taxation, Ghana. Please let our hands be coming together to really appreciate the person of Mr. Joseph. You could use your virtual hands to appreciate as I take more of his profile. All right, so that aside, Mr. Joseph Fiadzo, he has also served in various capacities within the GRA. He has served as the head of finance, also small tax payers office, and the audit team lead at the petroleum unit of the large taxpayers office, and the head of Abelempe NIMA Taxpayer Service Center. He has attended a number of international conferences and courses, some in the USA, UK, Holland, Norway, Ethiopia, Rwanda. He has gone far and wide. So who would be in the best position to give us this lecture, if not Mr. Joseph? All right. So within the GRA, he has also served on a number of committees on technical issues and tax reforms. And then he was part of the team that drafted and reviewed the tax law. Please continue to put your hands together as we welcome Mr. Joseph Fiadzo to give us his presentation on the economic impact of the global energy transition on African economy. Mr. Joseph, you're welcome, sir. You can go ahead and take the presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much indeed, Anita, for that wonderful introduction. This morning, I have a simple task. That task is to look at microeconomic impact of energy transition. Okay. Wherever you are listening to us from, impact our lives. The outline of my presentation, it's as follows. We will first of all look at microeconomy, followed by evaluation of the impact of energy, then the need for energy. We'll then move on to the need for energy transition. Then there are issues to consider under the renewable energy sources. We'll also look at the shift from fossil fuel to renewable sources. Thereafter, we'll be looking at anticipated benefits of renewable sources, and then renewable energy, and then the environmental impacts. So an understanding of microeconomy. So what is microeconomy? Microeconomy is about decision making or decision taking by individuals, households, and then businesses. Okay, but when you say macro, you are looking at a bigger picture at country level and global level. Looks at a country's inflation management, a country's interest rate management, balance of trade, and the likes. So macro looks at a very big picture, whilst micro, as the name implies, or as the term implies, looks at individuals' choices. So there's a choice to make whether to continue using fossil fuel. As you already are aware, we have EV cars, electronic vehicles, coming into the system. And then we still have regular fuel vehicles in our system. The choice is for an individual to make. Some have a combination of EV or electronic vehicles, which are from renewable sources, and then others fossil. Now, micro is about scarcity, choice, and opportunity. The choice must be made, and every choice made is an alternative forgone. For example, if you decide to buy an EV car instead of a fossil fuel, the alternative forgone is the fossil fuel, since you are using an EV car. Producers must do the same. So you have in China now, EV cars are being produced in larger numbers than the fossil fuel cars or the regular fuel vehicles. Okay, can we go to the next? Next, please. Yes. So, as we said, microeconomy is a branch of economics about behavior of decision takers within an economy. These are individuals, households, firms, and types of businesses. Okay, could you moving on? Yes. Why do we need energy? Energy is a basic human need. Without energy, a whole country cannot function. An individual cannot have a comfortable life. We need energy for powering our machines at home. You need energy for blenders, fans, TV, and then energy is needed for transportation, lighting, cooking. Yes. Now, the world has come to that point where reliance on fossil fuel is being brought into question because these are exhaustible or these are not renewable. If we take fossil fuel, which is from crude oil or petroleum, for you to discover a petroleum deposit or for a petroleum deposit to be accumulated at a particular place, either under the seabed or the seabed, which we call offshore or onshore on dry land, it takes millions of years materials, living organisms being accumulated over years, and these are compressed, and then heat in association with that compression leads to petroleum deposit. Now this deposit takes millions of years. So if fossil fuel is exhausted or the crude oil is drilled, there's no chance of replenishment. So the world must look for alternative sources of energy. Okay, there's a need for a change in the way we produce and consume energy. Now, fossil fuel also has its own environmental impact in that you have emissions into the atmosphere leading to pollution, leading to rise in temperature, which affects the climate of particular places and the like, depending on the industrial activity and the amount of gases emitted into the atmosphere. Now, there's a need for a change, or now implementing these new energy solutions is essential to counter climate change, which is one of the biggest threats to our own survival. Next. The shift from fossil fuel to renewable sources and clean energy, according to Goal 7 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, renewable sources offer cheaper, more reliable, and more efficient energy source than the non-renewable sources. Could you please go ahead? Yes. Now, there are a number of issues to consider when looking at a shift from the non-renewable sources to renewable sources. The renewable sources require high initial capital expenditure or investment. For example, for one to install solar panels and their batteries, one will have to cough out some significant amount of money. Thereafter, you continue to enjoy that. But some of the batteries have lifespan extending to 15, 25 years and the like. So after the initial investment, one will have probably 20 years or more for a change to be done. So it's not just going for it, but one must be prepared to spend. Now, windmills offer quite an easier option, but again, that also requires high-speed wind in areas that one can experience high breeze in order to generate efficient energy. The renewable energy sources will lead to lower energy cost and green growth. Please, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Of course, there will be changes in labor demand because those in non-renewable sources, once the renewable ones are coming on stream, they will have to build their capacity quickly in the renewable in order not to be left out. Firms which are within the carbon-intensive industries also face significant risk. But of course, the trend is that those who are in the non-renewable are the same, are almost the same entities and persons shifting to the non-renewable. For example, you have the electricity company of Ghana sourcing its electricity power for distribution to individuals and entities from both renewable and non-renewable sources. Okay, so you have the Volta River Authority tapping energy from all other sources. Okay, so it's not like once you are into non-renewable, you will say no to the renewable. What we are seeing is that persons who are in the non-renewable are almost the same persons trying to tap the potentials in the renewables as well. Please go ahead. Of course, renewable, we're going to have some machines being rendered redundant. We're going to also experience job losses, especially those who rely on fossil fuel or non-renewable sources. Some economies, of course, will go down depending on how they are able to shift quickly to the renewable sources. We have the Persian Gulf or the part of the Middle East relying heavily on fossil fuel. You have you have countries like Saudi Arabia. These are countries that rely heavily on fossil fuel, and crude oil has been powering their economies for so many years. Now, one wonders what will happen to the many vehicles that have been manufactured that use non-renewable sources. What will happen to them? Would they be phased out? I doubt that very much. It will take some years for them to be phased out. Some have projected 50 years or more, some 100 years, and that like petrol, diesel, and others for a long time. Talk about aviation. Aviation turbine kerosene. Okay, aviation turbine kerosene. Will it be replaced by EV as quickly as possible? Those are questions we need to address. Moving on. Now let's look at the sources of renewable energy and then their materials or what they rely on mostly. If we take solar energy, you are looking at battery. Batteries should have longer lifespan for you to enjoy your initial investment or to derive the benefit from initial investment. You have panels, solar panels, and these are dependent on hot climates for efficient production of energy. So those in the temperate region, I wonder how solar or the sun or sunlight. Now, when it comes to wind requires regions with high natural wind speed for the windmills to generate efficient energy or high amount of energy. Hydro, as we all know, came as hydro came after coal and others. Hydro also depends very much speed of water and then its mass, or what we call motion and mass. The energy we refer to as kinetic energy is the energy that is produced as a result of motion and mass, the speed of water and how heavy the water is, or the mass of the water flowing down to 10 turbines, which drive generators to produce electricity. So for you to enjoy hydro, you need, let's say, steep areas with rushing water and the like to power that. Then we also have bioenergy. We have biogas, biofuel production from agricultural waste, livestock manure, and sometimes human waste. Okay, you need quite a huge amount This takes us and see is giving opportunities, especially employment opportunities, to people to acquire new skills and get employment. There's research and development. You have international organizations ready to invest in research and development of renewable sources, since they are friendly to the atmosphere and the environmental hazards are even less. Of course, the renewable sources will also require manufacturing of solar panel, windmills, and then how do you call it? Biomass processing plants and the like. Then, of course, those who will do the installation, they must also build their capacity. And there's also an after-sales service. They'll have to be servicing the windmills, the solar panels, and the rest. The renewable sources will also reduce exposure to high fossil fuel costs. Of course, high fossil fuel cost is very susceptible to geographical tension. And then Iran, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Every now and then, we keep receiving reports from the news that oil prices are rising because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So reliance on high fossil fuel, which is one of the main non-renewable sources, can sometimes be very risky because of geographical tension or even workers' strike or industrial action and the likes. Renewable sources have multiplier effects in the sense that they will cause people to innovate and also attract investment. There's this argument that renewable sources will also lead to reduction of energy bills, although the initial investments are high, but arguably, there's that likelihood that energy bills will go down the more we use renewable sources because they are cheaper and they can be harnessed easily depending on your location. The next thing we want to look at is renewable sources like wind, hydro, geothermal are widely regarded as environmentally friendly, thus reducing negative effects of greenhouse emission compared to fossil fuel. The earth is all that we have as human beings. So renewable sources offer a much more friendly atmosphere for us to live in as human beings without spending so much money in cleaning the atmosphere in order to reduce the risk of heat and other things. Next, in conclusion, the phasing out of fossil fuel why do we say it's not an easy decision? Those who hold wealth generated from fossil fuel or non-renewable sources are still very influential on global stage as well as in country. They are prepared to fight off any attempt to phase them out. So what is the solution? I will go for a combination of the two sources, both non-renewable and renewable going side by side, followed by a gradual phasing out of fossil fuel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph, for the wonderful presentation. Yes, the hands are coming to tell you we really appreciate this presentation. And I believe we're ready with our questions. It was really insightful. It spoke so much about different aspects. And I had to think about the aviation part where you talked about, okay, we'll use kerosene right now. Are we ready to use electric planes at the moment? And how far can it take us? All right, so those are part of the things where we have to factor in when we talk about this energy transition. So I believe we have questions that are brewing already. And I really like the part where you concluded by saying that you would suggest a combination of the two sources and then a gradual phasing out of one of them, which is the fossil fuel, where we try to focus more on the renewable energy sources that are environmentally friendly. So for the Q&A session, it would be best we have our hands raised and then you'll be called up to speak. I've not seen questions typed out in the chat. Okay, someone said, Bright said he has a question. He has question and contribution. I think Bright would be the first. But quickly, just before Bright takes it, I want to ask how sustainable it is for us to say we want to have this full transition, because we talked about water, all right, hydro, and then we also talked about sunlight. Considering the nature of our season down here in Africa, if I would say like in Nigeria, where we have the rainy season, we have the dry season. What if I am concentrating more on hydro, and then what happens in the dry season when I don't have high flow of water? Or if I say I'm concentrating more on solar, and then I now have these rainy seasons where we have so much clouds to deal with, we don't have so much sun. How sustainable is it during this interplay within the seasons? That would be my own question. Thank you so much. So if you could address that quickly before I take on Bright to give us his own question. Thank you, sir.
Has the answer in the question as well, in that phasing out one completely exposes a person to the hazards of failure of the one you are relying on. So a combination of the two is ideal. In Ghana, I'm using Ghana because I'm a Ghanaian and I experience the Ghanaian situation. Sometimes you hear the major power supplier, the electricity, explaining to you that the hydro, because of the hydro, let me take Ghana's example. That time, the population of Ghana was, I think, less than 5 million or so. Now the population has ballooned to over 30 million. So relying solely on hydro, the Akosombo Dam alone, wouldn't be enough. Of course, Bui was added, Bong was also added, yet the authorities found it necessary to add thermal sources. So now we have gas power plants as well as diesel power plants, all giving us an energy mix. So it is always ideal to have a mix of energy. The danger is always there when one relies on only one source. So I believe that a combination of renewable and non-renewable is key. That's what the gentleman said, asking his question, that if you rely on this and something happens, what do you do? So a combination of the two is ideal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. Yes, that's the major word there is the energy mix. We should have that mix of energy and not rely on strictly one. So, Bright, if you are able to unmute, you can go ahead and ask your question. Any other person that has a question, please go ahead, raise your hand. I'll call you just after Bright. Bright, right. Please go ahead.
Okay, please. Great. Thank you very much. Like you mentioned, my name is Bright and I'm a student, petroleum engineering. My concern has to do with, so first of all, if we want to, are we completely transitioning from renewable, from non-renewable to renewable? That's my first question. And if yes, as it stands, what is the percentage of global energy consumption in comparison with renewable to non-renewable? Because even in the petroleum industry, we are transitioning from what we call unclean energy to the clean energy. And so I believe that we as non-renewable sources of energies are one way or the other finding a solution to the already existing problems when it have to do with environmental issues. For example, in the Middle East, I don't know if there's any petroleum company that is still flaring gases into the atmosphere. With that said, I believe that, like the presenter made mention, we can combine the two because non-renewable cannot stand renewable energy as it stands now. Because if you combine all these non-renewable sources of energy, from thermal to geothermal, to hydro, it's not even up to 10% of global energy consumption. So it means when you ride off non-renewable, which is fossil fuel, which provides more than 90% of global energy consumption, then the question is, can we even survive a day without fossil fuel? I don't know if you are getting my concept.
Yes, we are getting it.
Right. So
yes,
if we can't survive even a day without fossil fuel, then shouldn't we rather find a solution of producing cleaner energy from the fossil fuel, of course, which we are currently doing, green hydrogen, converting CO2 into fuel, which is clean, which has proven to be clean, than we completely transitioning from non-renewable to renewable, because we still have a lot of reserves. More than 1.8 trillion barrels of oil still remain to be exploited. And like you mentioned, if we want to completely write off fossil fuel, then it's like we are going back to dark ages. And we can't afford to do that. You made mention that the Strait of Hormuz was just locked down for about 2-3 days. I'm in the Middle East, and I can feel the tension. Within a month, what is happening in the global oil industry just because of Strait of Hormuz, which is about 17 miles, and is causing this downturn to the industry. If we want to completely move from non-renewable to renewable, I believe that it's really going to affect us energy-wise. And so I would rather suggest that people who are already in the non-renewable industry, which are already in the fossil fuel industry, would find a way to produce cleaner energy from this same fossil fuel in order not to, completely write off our non-renewable energy source. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was a brilliant one. Now, it took the world decades upon decades to arrive at where we are with fossil fuel. So it's not going to take a day or two for the renewable sources to replace fossil fuel. So I agree with the last question. The one who I agree with the last person who did the submission, that it's going to take time, and if we are not careful, we may end up being in darkness. The reason being that the energy demand, according to some experts, keeps growing between 1 and 2% every year. And so we are not likely to have we're not likely to have the renewable matching that kind of percentage in the, let's say, in the nearest future. So the best way is to keep the two moving alongside and then go gradually by phasing out the non-renewable sources as they get exhausted. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, for that response. And also thank you, Bright, for your contribution. We have about 10 minutes to go with our question and answers. So I would beg that we keep it really short so that we can accommodate more questions. Okay. So Austin, your hand is up. You can go ahead and make your contribution or ask your question. Just make it brief and short so we can take more questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. My question is that considering the transition, moving from non-renewable to renewable, I think it's becoming more of it's becoming imperative. Okay, but that being said, I want to know, crude oil or fossil fuel is very versatile. Versatile in the sense that there are numerous items or derivatives from the crude. We can look at the petrochemical aspect of that, and you look at our fertilizers, because our chemicals to do fertilizers, our plastics and everything. And now these have become a day-to-day use for households and for farmers. That being said, all the economics, which are, let's say, first-class economies in the world right now, developed using non-renewable or fossil fuels, to say that. So if I want to talk as an African, if we African are pushing for transition to renewable right now, and then we are going to, because we have not produced most of our oil and gas, so we will be faced with stranded assets. Now I'm looking at the petrochemical aspect, because I don't think renewable can just replace non-renewable in terms of fertilizer and the rest. And more so, we also have to be mindful, because I think when you look at renewable, it is unreliable in the sense that it is weather dependent. And so if the weather suddenly changes, then there is an issue. And so when we want to talk about base load power for electricity, I think we need to really sit down as a continent and plan well. Otherwise, we'll be faced with challenges going forward. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Austin. Mr. Joseph, would you be taking that?
Just to also comment quickly that the last speaker, I get the impression I'm getting from his submission is that we should rather be looking at supplementing the already existing non-renewable fossil fuel, so that we use the renewables to supplement or as an addition to the fossil fuel, in order to be assured of a reliable source of power. Since we all know that the renewable sources depend very much on weather conditions prevailing at a particular time. Thank you.
So thank you so much, sir. We really are grateful for this session. Please put our hands together to once more thank Mr. Joseph for giving us this wonderful presentation. I know we still have questions in the comment section, but as we continue with the program and we see we have more time, we will try to address all of them individually. or could give you a link where you could send the questions and we'll see how we can get the answers across to you. So without wasting time, I want to move over to the panel session, which will be handled by the moderator, who is no other person than Mr. Joshua, the convener of this event. So I would like to welcome Mr. Joshua Agbeshi up to anchor the panel session for us. So he would be introducing the speakers and then he will take charge of the session. So Mr. Joshua, over to you, please.
Patience, thank you very much for hosting the first part of our conference. Mr. Fiadzo has given us details of the impact, the global energy transition. One thing we must understand that it's not Africa that is transitioning to renewable energy. It is a global agenda, it's a global system. And so we are looking at how it is going to impact us and how it's going to affect our economy, what we have now and what we seek to achieve. Because if you look at the data we have, emissions from Africa is between 1 to 3%. And so if we look at other continents that for the sake of the safety of the environment that must transition, Africa shouldn't even be part of the list. But looking at the potential of Africa, Africa is a developing continent. So they anticipate that there's going to be a lot of urbanization, there's going to be a lot of production, there's going to be a lot of activities that is going to demand a lot of energy, which means that in the future, the demand for energy by Africans is going to be high, which is going to contribute to the safety of the environment. That is why it is necessary that Africa also considers transition. But before we transition, you have to understand certain things and lay down certain principles so that the good the transition is offering or the good the transition seeks to bring about will not be a disadvantage to us. If you look at the history of Africa, many of the times we have anticipation for good things in many sectors. But at the end of the day, when the implementation comes, it looks like we don't benefit so much. And so we have to understand this transition that is coming or that has already started being implemented. Africa must try to understand the technical aspect of it. Africa must try to understand the economic aspect of it so that we can lay down proper procedures and strategies to be able to benefit from the transition, whether it happens or not, or at the level which it happens, so that we don't also struggle like how we have struggled many of our sectors. And so we are going to look at the strategies and the systems that we must put in place to be able to maximize the benefits of the transition and, if possible, eliminate or minimize the negative impact it will come with. And so I'm going to lead this discussion, and this discussion I'm going to have some people on the panel. We have Madam Anita Mpora, who is a seasoned energy professional with a technical background in petroleum geoscience and petroleum engineering. With 7 years of experience in Uganda's oil and gas sector, during her tenure at Total Energies MS Uganda from 2018 to 2023, she excelled as a project and constructions engineer, playing a pivotal role in enabling infrastructure development for the Tilinga project. Additionally, she is currently contributing her expertise to the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, focusing on cost monitoring and management in oil and gas projects. An active board member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers and currently serving as the chairperson of SPE Uganda. She has a bachelor's degree in geoscience and production from Makerere University, where she furthered qualification with an international recognized certification in petroleum engineering. She's passionate about energy transition. That is why we invited her to be part of this, and clean energy access, and has actively contributed to renewable energy projects as an individual consultant, where she has participated in design, building, and supervising of clean energy LPG projects. So ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Madam Anita as part of our guest for our panel discussion. The next on our list is Dr. Charles Gyimah Ofofri. And Dr. Charles Gyimah Ofofri spearheads a research and advocacy initiative focusing on various aspects of the climate landscape, such as the economics of the energy transition, the solar PV value chain, clean cooking, and methane management in Africa's oil and gas sector. His expertise also extends to diverse projects in the extractive industry, covering topics like natural gas demand and supply dynamics in Ghana, local participation in the oil and gas sector, local labor absorption in Ghana's extractive industry, and gender responsive budgeting in mining affected communities. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Finance with a specialization in investment from the University of Ghana Business School. Additionally, he also holds management and Bachelor of Science degree in statistics and mathematics, both earned in the University of Ghana, and he is the policy lead for energy transition and climate change with Africa Center of Energy Policy in the person of Dr. Charles Gyamfi Ofori. Then also we have some special guests with expertise in the downstream sector. We have the General Manager of Health and Safety and Environment from Bost Energies, who has also played several roles in the oil and gas sector, who will also be sharing his expertise on certain areas in the energy transition that we need to understand. So Madam Anita, Dr. Charles, and Mr. Shea Assassie-Gyimah, please, you can kindly unmute and join me.
Thank you, Mr. Joshua.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, sir. So the first question we want to look at is the concept of energy transition. The world, with its intention of absorbing, including, or if possible, moving from non-renewable to renewable. I want us to understand, is it possible Africa can avoid? Does Africa have a choice, or we must submit to the transition system or the transition program? Dr. Gyamfi, if you can respond to that. Does Africa have a choice?
Okay, thank you so much for this question. I'm actually sitting in the midst of a huge workshop with some petroleum engineering students, and so the discussion has been broadcasted to them, and we are having this discussion as well. And so, yes, we are speaking to both a number of students here and professionals, and also to you as well. So we are doing two things at a time. But back to your question, whether Africa has a choice. I think it's not really about whether Africa has a choice or not. It's really about how Africa can position itself to benefit from the economics of the transition. Most of the time, conversations like this become more like maybe a Kotoko has conversation, or a Barca Real Madrid conversation, or an NPP and DC conversation where everybody has a side, and we don't think about what is happening and how we can plug in our own thinking and our own solutions to benefit it. So a number of narratives have evolved within this transition mindset. The first narrative has been about how oil and gas are not the world has used oil and gas to develop, and so it has time to pollute and industrialize. But we miss out on this narrative when we refuse to consider there are various countries in Africa that have been in the process of extracting for so long, but have not been able to utilize their resources very well. So the corruption and other issues around resource rents. Also, we miss out on what we can do around the technology advancement and where we can place ourselves. If you look at the solar PV value chain, for instance, it's a whole value chain from extraction of silica sand down to the assembly of solar modules. And Africa has just become a market for that. Because we play at the least end of the value chain, we mostly do not benefit much, right? We mostly do not benefit much. But if we're able to think through how we can be part of the production value chain, how we can foster, let's say, intra-Africa trade using the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, to do this, then we can position ourselves very well. So the issue is not necessarily whether we can wait or not. I mean, the technologies are evolving, the costs are reducing, and they are becoming more and more competitive with what we have. The question should really be where we should start and how we should take advantage of this evolution. And we should be able to take advantage from the development phases of it, when it comes to being part of the value chain, how we can leverage the minerals, the various regional mechanisms that we have to be able to do that, how we can think through leveraging the reduced prices to foster industrialization. All of those things are there for our disposal if we are really able to broaden our thoughts around this clean energy dynamics. And so maybe as part of the opening remarks, that is what I would say in terms of where we should be, not necessarily taking sides, but being positioned in a way that helps us to benefit not only from the environmental aspect, but also the social and economic side as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Anita, please, your thoughts on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Joshua, and thank you for having us. Good morning to our Western brothers and sisters, and good afternoon to the Eastern African side. So on that, really, Dr. Charles has really tried to bring us to an understanding of it's not really about whether it's a choice, but Africa cannot ignore global trends. Of course, with the Paris Agreement and Africa also being a convener at the COP26, COP28, we still have seen that there's been a definitive role in what Africa can play in the energy transition. I think what is most important is that Africa defines its own pathway because we are not at the same level. In Uganda, I can speak for Uganda, the energy transition plan speaks of a fast in, fast out analogy, whereby, yes, it's a global trend, it's a need, it affects literally the entire global village. But at the end of the day, those countries like in the Western that have been able to go in fast with the fossil fuels should be the ones coming out first. And then Africa, which has recently just been developing, discovering, exploring, and producing its oil and gas, should then come in after. So the thought is that what Africa should do is actually negotiate fair energy policies in the energy transition to favor Africa and its own problems, but also to prioritize development and energy access, given that over 600 million Africans actually don't even have access to electricity. And then also avoiding a premature transition decision. So I think that's what Africa should focus on, as, of course, it plays a role in the transition, but not at the same level as the other countries in the West. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as you mentioned, I was actually coming to that. And our data and history has shown how, I don't know how to put it, but how inefficiently how we have managed our energy sector. Looking at the discovery of petroleum, the production of petroleum, and the state of our oil and gas industry now. And as Madam Anita, you rightly mentioned, we have about 600 million people, according to the IEA report 2024. That's making about 40% of Africans who do not have access to energy or have access to electricity. We have experienced in South Africa, in Ghana some years back, and I think very consistent in Nigeria, low power shedding, and how we are not able to have enough power generation, which should be accessible, which should be safe, and which should be cheaper for everyone. Looking at the level or the amount of oil that has been produced, even being produced in Nigeria, and they are still having power issues. Looking at the cost of electricity tariffs in Africa, what would you say has been the inefficient way we have managed our energy sector over the years? Because if we do not learn from the mistakes we've made, that has made our energy sector not to be very efficient and giving us the maximum benefit we should have, I think that we may make the same mistakes in this transition process. So if you can share with us some of the mistakes we have made in our energy sector over the years, and how those things can be corrected even as we approach the transition phase. Mr. Shea, if you can respond to that for us.
Thank you very much, Joshua. I think there's a very long history of mismanagement within the energy sector. And I think we are all aware of the fact that mismanagement and corruption is quite rife within the power sector. But we also must understand that Africa is a growing population, so generation in terms of capacity is very, very important to support the growing industries. So one of the biggest issues that I feel has crippled the energy sector, aside mismanagement, is also collection. How we collect monies that consumers, in terms of power consumers, use. How do they pay for it? Sometimes they find it a bit exorbitant, so there's a bit of a disconnect between the power generated and the consumer's ability to pay for the power that he's consuming. Why? Because anytime you have, in relation to energy, you have power generation or supply, and you have consumers who are also not employed, it is very, very difficult to pay for the power they consume, leading to the illegal connections that has really crippled the industry. So one of the key problems you are facing in Africa is illegal connection and inappropriate or ineffective strategy to collect fees or charges from consumers. Now, tying that in with the energy, I would say that whilst the energy mix is very, very important, we also should be aware of the upfront cost that is associated with renewables. I believe that for the transition to be effective, government must find the means to fund it and also be a major off-taker. By that I mean, because of the upfront cost, which is quite exorbitant, a lot of private individuals or corporations will not go for that option. However, government appreciating the shortfall in capacity, that's generation, can fund renewable energy initiatives such as solar, and be the off-taker. Being the off-taker, for example, all agencies or majority of that, they can roll on that and be off-takers of the power generated. Then again, the government must also put in a strategy that ensures that the cost, of course, they are tax break. Clearly, if you look at what the Ministry of Energy is doing in transition, they are doing very well in offering tax breaks to individuals or corporations who want to go via the routes of renewable energy. However, what is going to be equally important is also exploring the local industries. For example, if you want to do solar, we have glass manufacturing companies in Ghana. How do we partner with them so that they are able to produce the glass that we need for the panels to reduce the cost of the panel? We have aluminium companies, Valco and all that. How do we partner with local industries so that the raw materials that we need to build or to install or to implement renewable energy technologies, we build them locally? So some sort of funding must be in place to push for that sort of agenda. In summary, I think the solution is multifaceted. And then I'll just zero in on what I'm doing with my partners and the challenges that we are facing. Trying to set up a solar manufacturing factory phase 1, inverter battery phase 2 and 3. Now, it's an excellent initiative, but many investors, even though they appreciate the benefit, find it difficult to invest in technologies or initiatives such as solar. So therefore, a clear initiative like the 24-hour economy, whereby we need energy to power some of the key strategic initiatives being rolled out by government, the government could support this sort of solar manufacturing plants and battery to power their initiative without necessarily importing the panels from China, which is relatively cheaper. But because of the geopolitics, what do you want? Do you want a case whereby you have the ability to manufacture your own panels, or a relatively cheap and comparatively not too cheap, importing everything and living in terms of the value chain to foreigners? Therefore, I'm saying that we should go hardcore manufacturing in terms of fully adopting the transition by getting into panel manufacturing, by getting into battery manufacturing, by getting into inverter manufacturing locally to create jobs, to have this sort of R&D, research labs, to explore other alternatives and to improve on what we do locally. Then we can be independent and be able to supplement the what do I say? The traditional ways of generating power in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So an emphasis on the question, and I think you have touched on many aspects of the state of our energy sector management, because quite remember at the early stage of oil discovery and oil production, a lot of things came up with the generation of revenue. We also had a promise of employment creation, local content participation. But you can see that since production in 2011, in the case of Ghana, we have not seen that materialize in its full capacity. We still have local companies that are being carried that do not have the capacity to own their own blocks or fully participate in the value chain of the energy sector. We still have students and young professionals who do not have the opportunity to be absorbed in the oil and gas sector as the energy sector promised of creating employment, local content, revenue generation. And currently, according to even the PIAC report, we can see a decline in our production caused by many factors. And so just to emphasize on the question for the response from Dr. Charles and Madam Anita, what are some of the mistakes we have made in previous time managing our energy sector, and how we can avoid that even as we approach the transition period? Madam Anita, do you have any comments on that before Dr. Charles?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joshua. So I think now the question, I think, is going more towards the local content. I could give an insight on the mistakes, especially that we are actually maybe doing or struggling with on the aspect of local content, and how do we participate on the issue of employment and also local companies participating. So in regards to that, maybe we can just also pick from the example of Nigeria, that even despite producing over the 1.5 million barrels per day, the country still imports refined products. So this highlights that there is a lot to be done, especially in the downstream integration, but also in the midstream. Even if we have seen success stories of the Dangote refinery, which is a step towards what an African-led industrial capacity looks like. But speaking of that, the local companies are facing issues currently to do with long-term financing. There is limited access to technology transfer, and of course not as favorable as possible having agreements or contract agreements with JV partners in the industry to ensure that there is a transfer of this technology, transfer of knowledge from the foreign companies. That's the other issue is, of course, the industrial linkages that are quite weak. If you look at the the aspect of generally Africa, but we can also see an example of Ghana where, yes, crude is exported and then refined products still are imported. And so also showing that there's a lack of value chain integration. So to me, what I think is what Africa can do is actually to take charge of the entire value chain of the energy industry, energy ecosystem. For instance, if you're looking at the fossil fuels aspect, we need to take charge right from the upstream, midstream, and then the downstream, setting up infrastructure that is required, training intensively at individual level, but also at company level, strengthening the agreements that we have between JV partnerships between the foreign companies and the indigenous local companies, so that there is a clear transfer of technology and capacity building, of course, so that we can have a visibility, have a participation, and not a fragmented participation, whereby we can be able to export crude but not be able to add value to it, and so also be our own consumers of our own products without importing them. So those are some of the challenges, if I can speak to one of them, that we are struggling with regarding the current energy ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I also want us to look at one area I also think that has failed our energy sector that we must look at, that I would like our panel to throw more light on, is policy formulation and policy execution. I think that we are either good at formulating the policies, or sometimes we even delay formulating certain policies. But when it comes to execution and implementation, we have a bit of challenge there. And I think that's one of the things that has really affected our energy sector. We are not able to maximize the benefit that is promised. And how can we address that? Are there any examples or any instances that we have to look at, and how we can manage it even as we approach the transition period? Mr. Sheikh, please.
I think I can answer to that as Mr. Dr. Charles Tamson. When we look at the state of the policy formulation and execution in Africa, like you mentioned, and rightly so, when you look at the policies in each of these countries, and I'm speaking for Africa, we have very good policies. Policy is not our problem, actually. We have very good and significant policies, and Africa generally has made significant progress in policy formulation. However, the execution still, like you rightfully mentioned, is the biggest challenge. So maybe I could just draw some examples from some of the countries. Is that, for instance, regarding the policy on local content frameworks, the strength we have is that we're increasing the adoption of the local content frameworks. In Uganda, particularly through the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, there is a lot of effort that has been put into transforming the policy from paper to actually seeing it implemented on ground through platforms like the National Supplier Database, encouraging the implementation of the Industry Enhancement Center that trains companies, ensures that companies get that exposure, industrial exposure from the industry players on how to successfully bid, how to successfully be able to win contracts, what they need to do in the aspect of safety, what are the standards. So that has actually, in some of the countries, actually been able to shift from the policy papers to the ground. But what we need is to recognize that it requires growth. Improved transparency in some countries, definitely, is also another aspect of how policy formulation is ending up into the execution aspect. And we also see that growing the energy transition strategies, as countries, like I already mentioned, the energy transition plan, for some countries, there's been a deliberate implementation of the energy transition plan, but mostly from the studies, it has shown that Africa will move gradually, in that most of the investment currently is going to start from, of course, injected.
Okay, Mr. Shea, please, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you very much,
Most of the
Joshua. I think whatever is
Sorry.
what I want to say is in support of what the last panelist said. I think I believe we don't have problems with policies, energy transition, and all that. We have all those policies in place. So it's implementation, which is the problem. And I think the biggest challenge is funding. That is one of the biggest challenges I see. And I also think that we focus, while policy and excellent frameworks are very important, we focus too much on that. It's necessary, foundation level, and also to give some sort of guidance. However, too much energies are not channeled into getting the right funding, building local capacity to be able to man key capital intensive projects. Which is a big issue. So from the funding perspective, I think we need to find the right partners who are interested in investing in renewables across Africa. And that is why I believe that, yes, there are incentives for participation in the renewable energy space. However, I keep on saying the government needs to play a bigger role. Not just tax breaks, but also making sure that they prepare the ground or they articulate the justification for some of these funding and spread it across industries or sectors or corporations who have expressed their interest to operate within the renewable energy space. So while I don't think government should be running the programs because of inefficiencies and corruption within those sectors, I believe there should be strong facilitators. Yes, they drive it through policy, but they can also offer some sort of guarantees and assurances to make this venture or these initiatives in relation to transitioning properly, whether solar, name it, to make it much more practical and make it much more accessible to players, local players who want to play in that sector. I also think another thing I want to say in relation to policy is adaptability. I think sometimes we pick high-level policies for developed nations and just tweak it a bit and present it. So if you go down on the ground, it doesn't reflect realities on the ground. So through policy, if you use it to develop proposals and you submit it and funders check it, investors check it, they realize that there's a massive disconnect. So we should be able to develop policies ground up. That means it must suit the African reality, it must fit the African context, and it must fit the African vision, incorporating local content and also offering not just guidance, but concrete support in terms of finances to be able to drive this sort of energy transition trajectory we are all on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Mr. Shea, you have placed so much emphasis on the funding, which tells that it's an accelerator or a limitation to this energy transition system. But I want to also discuss, are there other accelerators and limitations to the energy transition? What is possible to truncate it, and what are the things that are possible to accelerate it in our sector as Africans? Madam Anita, please, if we can respond to that, then Mr. Shea will respond to
that. Thank you, Mr. Joshua. Just go over that question again. Sorry.
Okay, so from the contributions that have been made so far, we have seen certain things that we need to do to ensure that this transition is successful. And one of the emphasis that has been made is on funding. So we want to discuss other accelerators and other limitations to the energy transitions. What are some of the elements that will be a limitation to the transition, and so that we'll know how to manage it, and what are some of the accelerators that will be an advantage to the transition, and we'll see how we can also manage so that it can drive the transition in the pace that Africa needs to have it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joshua. So Dr. Charles talked a lot about resource, which is mostly on investment. But other key drivers, in addition to that, really revolve around, like I mentioned, employment and local content. So pushing the narrative of how to build capacity, both individually and also at the local company levels. We also need to look at the other key driver, which is the aspect of production. Because Africa right now, if you look at the potential in terms of renewable energy, Africa has a potential to generate over 300 gigawatts of renewable energy from solar, wind, and hydro by 2030. So we see like countries like South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt are making great strides actually in the direction of renewable energies. Kenya is generating over 75% of its electricity from renewables, which is geothermal and hydropower. South Africa has, for the past years, been implementing the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, where they have attracted over 20 billion US dollars in investment. And also, according to the Africa Development Bank, the annual investment that will be required to achieve a universal energy access through, of course, new and cleaner energies, renewable energies, is estimated to be about 29 to 39 billion US dollars annually. So we have looked at the investment, but this actually just emphasizes how much is actually required for us to push the agenda of the gradual energy transition, but also to support the different countries that might not be at the level of South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt to actually pull up their socks. For instance, carry out an energy mix, which is a hybrid, depending on what is available in the country. I remember, of course, from earlier presenter, Mr. Joseph mentioned it, that it should be a gradual energy transition, and we should look at actually integrating and having a combined renewable and also non-renewables as we move to that agenda. So those are some of the key drivers. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. K.
Yes. So intentionality. So I'm in the downstream petroleum sector. Some of the few initiatives we put in place in terms of decarbonization and solarization of our depot. We import molecules or petroleum products, petrol, diesel. What we want to do is that then move it to our terminals, our storage tanks scattered around the country strategically. What we are doing is trying to solarize our depot. Solarizing our depots simply means that infrastructure, we build the basic infrastructure that will provide the necessary depots. And it's a good step in that direction. We cannot do it in one swoop, or it's like not like a big bang initiative, but we can do that incrementally. So imagine almost upstream, downstream sectors in the country making that sort of intentional effort to have a bit of a balance. It's upstream is upstream, and it basically it's a lot of crude, it's a lot of drilling and all that. However, in terms of their activities, they can allocate some of the sectors to be powered by renewable, like solar, so that even though we are transitioning, we are doing it in phases and it does not impact the general business. Another thing too, I believe is certification, ISOs, setting the right standards and operating with the right benchmarks. ISO 14001, which is environment, or 45001, which is safety. I think many of the individuals who operate within those sectors are not exposed to high standards that they can benchmark with. So we must also look at certifications and qualification. Certification on the corporate level, whereby a company agrees to adhere to, let's say, have the certification for ISO, whilst operatives on the ground also take certifications like the 45,001 and the 14,001. So in a nutshell, it is a holistic, we need a holistic approach that does not only look at investment, touching on the investment again. So there are a lot of projection, billions of dollars that will come to Africa for this sort of green transition. But how much of that do we receive? How much of those numbers are realized in terms of the transition, the green transition initiative that we are all pushing for? Yes, so we need a much more holistic approach from all fronts. We need to have strong investment drive in Africa in relation to renewable energy. We need boots on the ground in terms of capacity building, and we need the right training and certification to do things the right ways, setting the right standards and adhering to the right benchmarks so that we become a force to reckon with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so, Dr. Charles, thank you for joining us. We are looking at the limitation and the accelerators to the energy transition, trying to understand elements that can be a limitation to the transition and how we can manage it, and the accelerators to the transition and how we can also manage it so that we could drive it in the pace that will be a benefit to Africa. So if you can touch on that for us, please.
Again, please, I didn't hear that.
We have mentioned that it's likely to experience some limitations to the transition. There are certain elements that will be a limitation to the transition, and there are certain elements that will be as an accelerator to the transition. So we are evaluating these limitations and accelerators and see how we can manage them so that we can drive the transition successfully.
Okay, thanks. I think I've not been part of the conversation so much because of network challenges. As an accelerator is really the fact that most of the markets that produces these technologies, we in Africa generally do not control that market. And so when new technologies are coming in, we become utilizers of those technologies. And so we don't control that market. So that can accelerate the pace. And also the prices of those technologies, that's the competitive nature of the prices can be a huge, accelerator. For instance, solar prices are coming down, and everybody who has what it takes to be able to install solar can do that. If you look at the statistics, we don't have much statistics in Ghana on rooftop solar PV installation in terms of its capacity. But at least the censuses that statistical service does gives us a certain idea about how it is evolving. For instance, in the 2000 census, we have just about less than 2,000 households that had solar as their main source of lighting. In 2010, it moved to about 10,000 households. By 2021 census, we had about 23,000 households having installed solar and using it as their major source of lighting. So the demand has really, really improved. Of course, if you peg that with the total number of households, it's like a drop in the ocean, but you can't also discount the nominal growth in demand. And that can be fueled by price and technological advancement. The limitations on the other side could be sometimes knowledge gaps that fuel certain misconceptions about how the approach is going. There are many things or issues that come from uninformed perspectives that really full of misconceptions. Sometimes the financial barriers do inhibit people from accelerating clean energy and in integrating them in their system. So these come together to reduce the pace. And sometimes even governments own policies and plans that on paper seem to support clean energy integration, but actually in practice do not. If you speak with the solar PV industry right now, you see how maybe they are suffering from some regulations and other things. People are not even aware of the tax incentive they may get when they do clean energy integration, how they can even get those access to those incentives. So those things really bring down or limit the pace of clean energy growth and some other technical and technological factors, skills development gaps that we see in the period. And also the point that mostly when we talk of energy transition, we limit ourselves to solar, wind, but there are other things that we can talk about. I mean, clean cooking is really advanced and nobody's talking about it. We have been exploring ethanol for clean cooking and we see a lot of benefits, very, very inclusive, can integrate both skilled and unskilled labor, but people do not talk about that. So that gap in expanding our knowledge base around clean energy integration is missing, and that limits the pace at which we are growing. And maybe the last inhibitor I can talk about is the fact that we focus so much on the CO2 emissions removal point, rather than also thinking about the socioeconomic gains. How can clean energy deployment reduce poverty? How can it create jobs? How can it push us economically, to be more diversified in that space? So once we're able to do that, it helps us and even tailor policies that integrate both oil and gas and clean energy integration as part of a moving vehicle. And those are the things that we should be looking at. Sorry, my network is quite bad, and so I may be jumping on and off as the conversation goes. But
sure. Because of our time, we have a couple of questions, but I want to reduce it so that we can be within the time. But Dr. Gyimah, when you were speaking, you mentioned something about government policies that are on paper, but that may not be implemented or that may not be favorable. I think that sometimes the transition, what it comes with, affects government business, or is likely to affect government business. Because looking at our report, we have been able to generate about $11.2 billion from our oil sector, I think, since 2011 to 2024, thereabouts. So transitioning to renewable energy, does it have the capacity to maintain our level of revenue, or is it going to affect government business? I believe that sometimes when it has an impact on government revenue and government business, and that is why they may stall it for some time. But then can you please enlighten us on how the transition impacts government business, government revenue, whether it has a negative impact or a positive impact? Because I think if it has a negative impact, that is when it will be some of the limiting factors coming from the government side. So can you please enlighten us on how the transition will affect government business, especially in Africa?
It will affect government business if we don't think about the energy system as a whole system. We don't think about our revenue generation potential as a whole system. If we lock ourselves into a certain singular pattern of oil revenues, we forgo other industrial benefits that we are getting. I mean, think about this scenario. Net metering is improving. You have a lot more people adopting solar PVs. They are moving, sending power to the grid. The utility has enough power to distribute, and then there's enough power or cheap power for industrialization and for manufacturing and for productive use of electricity. And that is huge productivity that is accounting for us on the other side. So you see, when something is being affected on one side, you should also look at how we can benefit from the other side. And that is the kind of thinking we should be looking. And that's really, really why diversification should be our thing. I think the conversation oil is still relevant. There's no two ways about it. But it is we really being mindful of the fact that there are new technologies that are coming in, and how we position ourselves to benefit from those technologies is important. If we think about it as just, you losing petroleum revenues, we would lose focus. But if you look at it as how clean energy can even foster, industrialization, how the production and then even the assembly of PV models can support skills generation and skill development and technology transfer in there. It brings in new revenues that we've never thought of. We've never, because already your production is even subject to, geopolitical influx. Look at what happened to us during COVID. Prices slammed so huge that we had to go back to the drawing board to redesign. If we were more diversified, then we know that at least you'll be protected. So I think that we shouldn't just think through about how much revenue are going to lose, but how much of such, even if, and which I think we will need more assessment to look, even if there are losses, which areas can we look at the gains, and how do we position our, up and coming students who are into engineering positions, how they can also be more integrated in the clean system. Then we build a future that is more resilient, that can work well for us, creating opportunities for everybody within the space. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Madam Anita, please, can you respond to this question? In your presentation, I think you made mention of endorsing the gradual transition process. And how can we manage the gradual transition process? Because you could see that if a lot of people are seeing the benefits of the energy transition, if we leave it for the business people or the investment people, they will look at the business side and not really understand the policy of the gradual transition. As of 2023, we had about 70,000 EVs in Ghana, and checking yesterday, in the world, we have about 2 million EVs that have been produced. Are there policies regulating the market that is being created? Because there's a market being created. When the demand increases, definitely it's going to also push supply. And if we don't take care, the regulation of the gradual process or the management of the gradual process will move from policy and decision makers into the hands of businessmen and the consumers. How do we manage the system and the market so that we can see that gradual transition that will not affect the current status, or that will not bring Africa to a place that it will be difficult for us to handle our energy sector?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joshua. So your question, I think, to me sounds like what is Africa like in terms of governments? What are the governments doing to ensure that it's a gradual energy transition and not a fragmented market where everyone is doing what they want to do? Someone is introducing solar, another private company is also bringing in wind. I mean, all these actually stem from policy. Back to what we mentioned earlier, what are the policies in place that are speaking to energy transition? What is going to come first? What is going to come next? What is going to come third? And the view. So in my perspective, actually, the way we can have a regulated and controlled manner of the energy transition could be looking at actually what is required to be in place before we can actually get where we are getting to, because it's not going to be a leap. It's not going to be a jump. Dr. Charles mentioned it's not a big bang. It's going to happen transitionally. So some of the things that should appear in the policies that governments right now are setting up in regards to energy transition should be focused, for instance, on grid modernization and expansion. We saw that in Nigeria, and many Nigerians on this call can attest to this, that even with them being Africa's largest oil producer, most of the households actually are using generators, for the load shedding and everything. So there is a challenge of infrastructure development in terms of the grid, improving the grid, expanding the grid, and modernizing the existing grid. So we need to have a policy that ensures that grid modernization and expansion is being absorbed to diversify the energy sources. Because even when we bring in solar, these grids can still be used, because solar energy eventually is first converted to electricity and then back to the grid or sold back to government. So this infrastructure needs to be in place. Then investment in transmission and distribution. Like I already mentioned, it's related. Then we need to see that there are energy storage systems in place, because once we get into, for instance, solar, are we going to just harness solar that is only supported?
Sorry about that little silence that we have. I think it's a...
Hello? Am I back? Can I be heard? Sorry. Can I be heard?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. So the other issue, I don't know if you got my first point, but I was trying to mention the things that need to be in place.
Sorry for that little break. It's a little network issue from our moderator, and he'll be joining shortly to wrap up this session. So just give a few minutes so that he...
Madam Anita, please proceed.
Okay, sorry about that. So the other aspect would be the energy storage systems, like I was saying, to ensure that there is a flexible generation backup. If we are to produce more energy than we need, do we have an energy storage system in place in the different countries that can actually store this energy for hard times, like we mentioned, during load shedding or during the Strait of Hormuz kind of challenges, but we can be able to diversify and use that other kind of energy. Then expansion of the gas to power and cleaner transition of fuels. Of course, this starts from the current infrastructure that is already existing in some of the countries, which is oil and gas infrastructure. And with that, we see that there is a push for gas to power instead of flaring, instead of, we are seeing that there's more policy that is driven into how do we utilize the excess gas into the power. So we need that kind of infrastructure in place. And there's so many, but those are just a few of them. Of course, the policy, and I insist on this a lot because I'm also passionate about capacity building. I insist on the building of training centers, labs, centers of excellence, so that we don't have private companies coming in with foreign expatriates, and yet our people are not trained to rise up to the challenge, especially when Mr. Joseph was talking about his presentation. He said that one of the issues that we need to consider is loss of jobs. There's going to be job and labor adjustment and labor demand changes. So how, for instance, is a student here who has done petroleum engineering, how is he being prepared for the transition? Because most of everything that he is studying or she is studying can actually be related to the energy transition and other sources of energy. So all that is required to be put in place before everyone can now become a player in the energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think due to our time, we'll wrap up, but we'll create another platform to exhaust all that we need to know about the energy transition as young professionals. And so before we leave, I want to give all our speakers 1 minute to share their thoughts. We'll also definitely create an opportunity for us to come again to exhaust all that we need to know and understand about the energy transition, so that we know the direction the world is going and how, like Dr. Gyimah said, how we can position ourselves to be able to be part of the supply chain so that to benefit us, and it will not be like how we have seen our energy sector being managed in time past. So I want to give Mr. Fiadzo 1 minute, Madam Anita 1 minute to share the others with us, even as we wrap up the conference. Mr. Joseph Fiadzo, please, if you can share your last words with us.
Yes, so my impression is that all the speakers have submitted that the shift from non-renewable to renewable must be gradual, having at the back of our minds the multiplier effect of the non-renewable. One gentleman said we should consider the derivatives or the industry, the entities that depend so much on the derivatives of, let's say, fossil fuel. We should consider the entities as well as those in employment of those entities. This is my key takeaway, that we shouldn't rush in phasing out the non-renewable because a lot of people's lives depend on it. So we should rather go for a mix or an integrated kind of energy mix, so that going forward we phase out the non-renewable gradually. Thank you very much. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Madam Anita, if you can have your last words with us.
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Joshua. I think this is now going out as an encouragement for students here and young professionals. I know usually this topic actually creates a lot of anxiety because you have at the back of your mind, you're thinking, did I actually study the right thing? But you did, because we are adapting and the world is adapting. Africa is also adapting. We have the aspects of AI, digitization, all are happening at a very fast rate. So what should be your focus as a student, as a young professional here, is actually to be knowledgeable, to continue training, to continue learning. As the global trends move and shift, you should also be in a position to shift. And the greatest risk here is actually not the transition itself. It actually gives us opportunity because as Africa, we can be able to see and benchmark from what the Western world has done, what their mistakes have been, what their challenges and issues have been, and we can actually create our own solutions as Africa for Africa. And the greatest risk is basically a poorly planned transition. And back to what Dr. Joseph mentioned, is that we should thrive as Africa. We will thrive with an integrated energy mix and not with one or the other. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, we have not been able to exhaust all that we need to know about the energy transition. It's something we have to understand holistically and completely so that we're able to find our feet in the energy transition. So I'll hand over to Patience to close us.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Joshua. Thank you so much for anchoring that session very, very well. And also all the speakers and the panel members that took part in the discussion. It was really, really insightful. And I know everybody on the call had one or two things to learn, to gain, and then to take back home and see how we can also position ourselves for the energy transition that has come, not like it is coming. Okay, so on that note, I'll use this opportunity first to, yes, thank you so much for the round of applause. Please put your hands together for the speakers, the moderator, and every other person that took part in this discussion, even you for asking your questions. We really, really appreciate you. Thank you so, so much. So using this platform, I would say thank you so much to our convener, the Global Petroleum Institute, for organizing this conference on the economic impact of energy transition. It has been really, really insightful. Thank you so much, especially to Mr. Joshua and his team for putting this together. It's really, really impactful. Also, we give special thanks to Mr. Benedict for giving us our welcome address, all the speakers and panel members, Mr. Joseph Fiadzo, Dr. Charles Ofofri, talk about Madam Anita, and then Mr. Chair. We thank you so much for being part of it, for being for accepting our invitation to take this speech, to take this discussion to the next level. We're really grateful. And for all the participants on this call, you are the MVPs, I would say, for being here. We are really grateful. So you can put your hands together for yourselves too. It's not been easy for you to be around for like 2 hours now. And then we still have this good number here for those from Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Uganda, Cameroon, Namibia. I saw those from Congo, Kenya, Mozambique, UEA, and the United Kingdom. We really appreciate you. We appreciate your time. And then, I know we asked some questions if we're going to get access to the slide. I think the organizers have our contacts. And then when discussions are made, they will see how they'll be able to, if it is for us to get access to, they will send it to us because they have our contacts. All right. I know we have more questions to ask. So since you already have the brochure, you have the name of the speakers, the panel members, we could also reach out to them on LinkedIn so that we can continue the discussion beyond this just this virtual session. And hopefully when we see physically also, we can also talk about that. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you. And when we put out more programs like this, we expect and we believe that you'll be able to come and join us. Thank you so much, and see you again in the next program that we'll be having. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you all. Bye.